Thank you for joining us today. My name is Helen Freeman. I'm the network manager for the Future Urban Ventilation Network. And we're hosting this event today with the Institute of Air Quality Management, and Honor from the Institute of Air Quality Management will be introducing herself shortly as well. But yeah, the purpose of today is to bring early career researchers and early career professionals who all work in air quality together to share their projects, to share their career paths to date, and to hopefully find opportunities to collaborate on future projects and find out more about just general career paths and opportunities in air quality and also environmental health in the wider air quality community. If you'd like to tweet today, then there's 2 Twitter tags I've put on this slide, and there's also the email address in the middle, which is our Future Urban Ventilation Network email address. We also go by the name of the Breathing City Network. And then obviously there's 2 websites listed there if you want to find out a bit more about the 2 organisations that are organising today. We'll start off with a welcome and introduction from Professor Kath Noakes. She's our Principal Investigator for the Future Urban Ventilation Network, and she'll be talking a bit about the air quality challenges that we might see in our sector in the next 20 or 30 years. And then the rest of the morning will be followed by a few talks from early career academics and early career professionals working in academia, working in the professional private sector and also in the public sector. And then we'll have an opportunity in mid-morning for some networking on an online app called Wonder. And then we'll finish off with a panel session, which again will have a mix of people from academia and the private sector and the public sector. So I'll just pass over to Honor quickly, who will be able to introduce the IAQM, and then we'll start with some slides from Kath Noakes.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Honor Pucciato. I am a committee member of Institute of Air Quality Management. I also lead a subgroup, which is the Early Career Development Group. So I work with young professionals, which they starting their career in this field. As an institute, we really, we are a body for air quality professionals, and we really deal with every matter that affects air quality professionals. So we produce guidance and position statements, but we also encourage people to network and to really share the knowledge. So now I will pass to Kath, Professor, our speaker, or to Helen, I don't know. Actually.
Yeah, well, Kath, if you're ready to share your screen, then please drop in and do so.
Okay, can you see that?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I can see that. Thank you.
Yeah. Great. Okay then. So thanks, Helen. Thanks, Honor. Thank you both for organising this, and it's a pleasure to talk in the first part of this. And it's great to have so many people here with interests in careers around air quality. So I've got this title of Air Quality Challenges over the next 20 years, which I thought, when I agreed this with Helen, I thought this sounded really straightforward. And actually it turns out it's not that straightforward, because you have to really think about what might happen. So I'm just going to kind of give a little bit of a few, I guess, thoughts of my own, really, around what some of those air quality challenges are. And for those people who are particularly looking at developing research projects, maybe this will give you some thoughts and ideas about where there are some challenges and why those challenges are there. Just before that, I briefly want to just talk a bit more about the Future Urban Ventilation Network. So the idea of this network is it's a network across academia, across policy, across practice, industry, to bring people together to scope something that we call a Breathing City framework, which is thinking about really how does air get in and out of buildings, and how do we understand that design to basically manage air quality exposures both inside and outside buildings in city environments. So there is an idea about how we develop new research projects in there, build partnerships, and think about the practicalities, including the policy and regulatory requirements, to enable us to move to a place of designing ventilation of buildings from a health-based perspective. And we bring together these people across some different themes. We think about some of the detail of how indoor and outdoor flows are coupled together, thinking about, well, if we're designing ventilation, what are the health measures and metrics that we can use, and the practice and regulation in there, and recognizing as well that this is not just about air quality, because we can, you know, design buildings for air quality, but we also have to think about comfort, noise, energy, climate, etc. So there's a whole raft of aspects in there. And these are just the partners that are involved with the Breathing City network. So I think, just to go back to the original question about, you know, the future of air quality in the next 20 years and why does it matter? I mean, I think everybody probably knows this already, but it matters because of the very substantial global health impacts that we have from air pollution. And I think that's, you know, the biggest driver for nearly everything that we do around air quality. And WHO recognise this. This is, I mean, it's slightly older data now, but recognising the substantial, in fact, the biggest environmental risk to health is from air pollution. And that's a very substantial number of deaths annually every year. So in 2012, this was around 3 million, attributable solely to that outdoor air pollution, which is a staggering number. We know as well, I think everybody here probably knows that the air pollution affects everybody throughout their life. So the impacts go right from before people are born, in low birth weights and pregnancy are associated with air pollution, right the way through childhood and development, and then onto the people in the older years of their life when they're vulnerable, particularly to things like dementia and heart attacks. So we know that the air pollution has an impact across all of these health aspects. And I think everybody here also probably knows pretty well now the sad case of Ella Kissy-Deborah, who is quite unique in a sense, isn't it? She was the first person whose death, she died in 2013, aged 9, from a severe asthma attack, but her death was the first one where air pollution was highlighted as being a material contribution to her death. So not just a sort of an influencing factor, but a really substantial factor in her death. And that was predominantly traffic pollutants, particularly nitrogen dioxide, as she lived on in a house on a busy main road in southeast London. And you know, that one really has sort of sparked recognition that air pollution is not just, you know, not just a thing that is important, but actually it really is a major cause of death. And the coroner who investigated this recommended actions to prevent future deaths. So I think there's a real incentive to be able to mitigate air pollution. But it's not just outdoor air. We spend about 90% of our time indoors. We're exposed to a whole raft of different pollutants. Some of those come from the people in the building themselves, but some of them come from the materials, the products, the ways in which we manage our buildings. And the understanding of this is really quite limited in many areas. We've got lots of pockets of information, but not there's a lack of joining up of a lot of information linked to indoor air pollution. And if we start thinking about what the past couple of years, COVID has actually had a beneficial effect from the aspect of indoor air, in that it's allowed a spotlight to be shone on indoor environments, identifying that huge numbers of our buildings are poorly ventilated. We lack a lot of data, we lack measurements, we lack the ability to enforce the quality of those environments, and that the large numbers of people are not aware of their indoor environment and the impacts on their health. And there's been quite a bit of substantial work through the Royal Academy of Engineering looking at infection resilient environments, which has focused specifically on the indoor environment and infectious disease, but then recognising that things that we might do in indoor environments to tackle infectious disease are also going to have benefits for indoor air quality too. So when we're thinking about, you know, future challenges, I think all of the air quality challenges could come into this cycle of, you know, what are the risks? Where are people being exposed to things? What are the emission sources and ways in which they're exposed? What are the mechanisms by which those emissions are expose people, and how do they how's that taken up by the body? What are the ways in which we can develop solutions to both mitigate the emissions in the first place and mitigate exposures to them? And how well do those work in the real world, and do they actually change things in the real world? But all of these things are complex. So within here, we've got physical, chemical, biological processes happening. We've got that happening within the context of a landscape that is influenced by our social settings, economic, political decisions, human behaviours. We've got a raft of different technologies, some of which are good, some of which are less good. And we've got complex interactions, so measures that might be there to improve one thing, for example, in buildings, measures to reduce energy consumption of buildings might have knock-on impacts on the indoor air quality in a detrimental way. So understanding those complex interactions between things is really quite critical. So now I wanted to just highlight some of the things where I think there are some challenge areas going forward. I think one of the really big challenge areas, and the hardest one, is likely to be around getting evidence for air quality and health together. So really concrete evidence that the two things come together, particularly for indoor exposures. So it's very hard, there's no reasonably good confidence that there's the correlations between health impacts and outdoor air quality, certainly for some pollutants. But the exposure, the data for indoor air is far weaker. We lack the actual data on indoor air quality and we lack the health data. So there's some real challenges in getting that data and thinking about the ways to do that. And one way I think is how we can use personal exposures to understand how we're exposed to different pollutants through the day, thinking about transient profiles and thinking about long and short-term health impacts. So I think there is some real needs around there. And then of course thinking about different groups of people. There's quite a lot of studies look at homes, and a number of studies look at schools, but there are a whole raft of other environments too where we are exposed. Very little data on things like many workplaces, many hospitality environments, many social settings. So there's and transport environments. So there's a lot of different things, and lots of different people will be impacted in different places. I think another big challenge area going forward is air quality and climate. So, you know, we will see changes as the climate warms. We will see changes in our environments. We will also see changes as we respond to adapt for climate change. We change our transport, we change our fuels, we change our agriculture. We will see then changes in the sources. We know already that extreme events, like we've seen more frequent wildfires throughout the world, which will then impact on those longer term changes in terms of emissions. And then there are aspects around strategies and challenges, technologies to provide clean air. So, you know, again, there's this conundrum of how do you make sure you heat a building correctly and ventilate a building correctly. Then there are, you know, there's a need to think about the technologies there and which ones provide us with both clean air and low carbon at the same time, and how do we design, implement, test those effectively. And then I think there are other areas which are quite well underexplored at the moment. Things like the interface between air systems and water systems, as just one example. So what are the air quality impacts of sanitation, particularly in developing countries? What are the air quality impacts of water reuse as we you know, look to minimise you know, use of water in urban environments? I think there are a set of challenges around the tools and techniques that we use to understand air quality. The past few years have seen a massive growth in low-cost sensors, but we're now at that position where we can use them, but the scale up of those and the mass data collection used by those has not really happened fully yet. And there's still quite a lot of work to be looked at there. And then particularly about how citizens use those tools and techniques themselves. There are then more specific research focused questions around what are the techniques we can use to identify different new pollutants. Biological sampling is a real challenge. Biological sampling at the moment is very much manually done and very hard to automate. Are there new ways in which we can sample which allow us to collect more information? And then from a modelling perspective, how can we model some of these complex interactions, particularly between indoor and outdoor environments, and look at the time and space resolutions in there? There's opportunities from stochastic modelling and machine learning approaches that could all be applied to air quality problems. Then these go into the real world. So behavioural aspects, behaviour has a huge impact on both the emission sources and how we manage those, whether people understand and are aware of what's happening in their environments, and how what they do impacts on that. We have issues around regulation. So at the moment, particularly for indoor environments, what are the standards we should have, and can we determine appropriate health-based standards? It's quite a challenging thing, but even once you've got standards, how do you put those enforcement in place and make sure that they happen? And then I think there's an economic argument to be made as well. I think there's a lot more work to be done around making the case for why we should invest in clean air, particularly in workplaces and in other business environments. So, and I've just picked out another set here, which is particularly for indoor air quality. If people are thinking about indoor air as a challenge area, there's a really nice series of questions in Building and Environment Journal that have been published over the past couple of years. A whole raft of papers called the 10 Questions series, and I've just picked out a handful of them here which have relationships to air quality. So, you know, people are looking for challenges in this area. These are a really good place to start reading up on the background around indoor air quality. So just to finish up, I think there are a huge number of challenges, but they range from some very specific small scale things that would be suited to, you know, smaller scale individual, say PhD or MSc projects. But then there's also a real need for some large scale coordinated activity, particularly around these questions about air quality and health, and how we get that evidence together. Regardless, I think interdisciplinarity is critical. So even when you're working in more of a single discipline type area, being aware of the wider interdisciplinarity of it and thinking about how to collaborate across different organisations to be able to take things from you know, small scale laboratory type understanding all the way through to real world evidence. So I'm going to stop there because I know I'm well out of time, and hopefully that gives you a bit of an introduction to thinking about the breadth of indoor of air quality going forward for today.
Thanks, Kath. That was a really nice slide to finish on. It really sets us up for the talks today. We will have some questions time for Kath later because she'll be on our panel. But for now, I think we'll just crack on with our plan and move on to our first speaker of the day. So if you'd like to share your screen, we've got Mark Nichols from Hydroc, who will be starting off our talks from our early career professionals and researchers today. Thank you, Mark.
No worries. Hopefully everyone can see my slides. Excellent. Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks, Cass, for the great overview. You mentioned a few times in your presentation about workplace, so that sort of segues quite nicely into what I'm going to talk about this morning. So my name is Mark Nichols. I'm a principal consultant for an engineering, design and sustainability consultancy firm called Hydroc, but I also sit on the Early Career Network Committee at the IIQM with honour, where my role is to help organise CPD events and networking sessions similar to this event today. But I've been invited to present an indoor air quality case study this morning, and for this presentation I'm going to focus on a recent project of mine which looked at occupational exposure to workplace dust. So I was asked to try and answer a number of questions within a case study, and so these questions form the main structure for my presentation. So I'm going to introduce the project and why it was important to our client. I'll talk about what we did and what we found, and conclude with the implications of the data that we obtained and how it was used to inform the client's decisions at the end. But for commercial sensitivity reasons, I've omitted certain details from the presentation. So Hydrock were commissioned to undertake a dust monitoring survey following complaints of tenants within a shared warehouse regarding observed high levels of dust soiling on their internal stock and concerns over the potential health effects from inhaling that dust. And it's worth noting for context that there are two broad descriptors for dust in the workplace specifically: inhalable dust, which can be breathed in via the nose and mouth, and a finer fraction called respirable dust, which can penetrate beyond the terminal bronchioles into the gas exchange region of the lungs. Dust exposure is associated with a number of adverse health effects, the most serious of which are various types of cancers and COPD. When dust is present in the workplace at a concentration in air equal to or greater than 10 milligrams per cubic meter for inhalable, or 4 milligrams per cubic meter of respirable dust, and that's as a time-weighted average over an 8-hour period, it is considered to be a substance hazardous to health under COSH regulations. And these limit values are referred to as workplace exposure limits, or WELS, to protect the health of workers. And the Health and Safety Executive's EH40 document provides the full list of WELS, which contains over 500 substances, and that's freely available online with a quick Google search. Hydrock attended the warehouse to undertake the dust survey, which comprised three main parts, basically gravimetric sampling, ambient monitoring, and collection of loose samples for microscopy analysis in a laboratory. So in essence, what we wanted to know is how much stuff was present, at what concentration, and what the stuff was. That was the aims of the investigation. So our role in the project was to undertake the monitoring, and I'm going to go through each of those different types of monitoring in a bit more detail one by one. So starting with gravimetric sampling then, which requires the use of a sampler, pump and filter media. And in this study, we used sidekick pumps, a calibration device, and pre-weighed foam inserts in IOM cassettes. And you can see a schematic of this on screen, where you have the foam plug, which slots into the sampler body and is affixed with the front plate. And you can see an example of the IOM cassette with the foam insert exposed here in this image on the left. The airflow rate of each pump was calibrated to 2 litres per minute using a calibration device, and all equipment was set up in the site office, which was an uncontaminated area. The calibrated pumps were then attached to the inlet of the IOM sampling media via the connecting tube. And for personal exposure monitoring, samplers were attached to the staff member's upper chest or lapel within approximately 30 centimeters from the nose and mouth region, which is known as the breathing zone. So then a range of routine activities were carried out during the monitoring, such as packing and returns within the warehouse, which were largely observed to be quite stationary tasks, so staff were staying in one place, and then floor picking and a forklift driver, which were more roaming tasks where staff were moving around the warehouse and moving stock. For an 8-hour time-weighted average, sampling time should be no less than 4 hours, so our survey was 4 hours at each of those locations. The samples are then sent to the lab for analysis, and in this case we used the Institute of Occupational Medicine as our lab for this. But the results are returned by them as total weighted concentrations in units of milligrams. So conversion to airborne concentrations in milligrams per cubic meter is then required to compare to the WELS. So for this, the equation on screen can be used. So C is the units we need to convert to, as this is the unit of the well. M is the gravimetric results returned from the lab, and we know VS because we calibrated the pump to 2 litres per minute and we know the sampling duration. And then further conversion of results to an 8-hour time-weighted average is required following approved methods published by the Health and Safety Executive. Ambient monitoring of particulate matter was also undertaken using the turnkey instrument's dustmate, which uses a light scattering technique to determine the concentration of airborne particles. The light scattered by the individual particles of dust is converted into an electrical pulse, which is proportional to the size of the particle. So the intensity of the light pulse is an indicator of particle size, and the microprocessor in the kit is able to then calculate the expected mass of the particle. So we use this monitor to monitor 15-minute ambient average concentrations at a number of spot locations within the warehouse, which is a useful way to identify key dusty areas and to granularly map dust concentrations spatially. Finally, we collected loose samples from various soiled surfaces within the warehouse for lab analysis, and in this case we used dust scan. And these samples were analysed using optical microscopy to investigate materials present and identify potential sources of the dust. Optical microscopy is a useful tool in dust characterization, and it's typically used to examine physical properties of dust, including colour, morphology, approximate size, relative proportions, and so on. So that's what we did. Who benefited from our findings? So we found that the working environment was considerably dusty, as seen in the image on the left, which shows deposited dust on surfaces within the warehouse. And we did also observe that staff were not wearing any respiratory PPE, despite their concerns that prompted the study in the first place. So the gravimetric analysis showed that there were no exceedances of the well for the finer respirable dust fraction, but there was exceedances of the well for inhalable dust by up to 41%, monitored by the samplers attached to roaming staff. So that suggests that risk of exposure in this case increases when undertaking roaming activities and during the movement of stock, which could activate this deposited dust into the air and to be breathed in. The 15-minute ambient monitoring, although it was indicative, showed that average monitored PM levels were below the well thresholds for both fractions. But spatially mapping the spot concentrations again showed higher levels in areas where stock was being disturbed by roaming tasks more frequently. Finally, the optical light microscopy results showed similar composition in all of the samples, comprising what's called typical warehouse dust, which were most likely sourced from forklift tires, as shown by the black opaque particles in the right image. Wear and tear to concrete floors, which are shown by the mineral grains in both images, and wooden pallets, which are represented by organic fibres, such as the blue wooden pallet fibre in the left image. And indeed, there were blue pallets in use throughout the warehouse, which were observed. So various regulations place emphasis on eliminating dust entirely from the workplace, and in some industries this is definitely possible, such as introducing local exhaust ventilation systems above working areas. But in a warehouse it's not always possible, which means further controls are appropriate. In this case, the warehouse was fairly poorly ventilated. It was natural ventilation only with small louve's at roof level, with no feasible means of installing further mechanical controls. But based on our findings, we found a risk of exposure to inhalable dust. And so we sent our client a list of potential control measures. And the ones listed in red on this slide were the measures taken forward by their health and safety manager. So that included PPE for roaming staff in the form of dust masks, mandatory cleaning procedures, as we found out the warehouse had actually never been cleaned since it opened, introducing the use of sweepers, and administrative controls such as introducing a rota system for roaming staff, whereby rather than working an entire shift in a roaming role, they would switch to a stationary role midway through where we'd shown that exposure was reduced. So for very little cost and effort to the client, the employees in the warehouse should now benefit from reduced exposure to dust in their workplace. So that's a quick overview, which concludes my presentation. Hopefully that was interesting. Thanks for listening. And if there are any questions, I'll do my best to answer, but I'm not sure if that happens now or at the end of this first session.
I think we can do them now. Thanks for that, Mark. That was really interesting. Amazing that they haven't cleaned the warehouse since they opened it. I have some questions, and then if you want to put any in the chat as well, then please do. But I was wondering, with when you do these suggestions for changes to be made in the workplace, is it a sort of a discussion between them and you, like you suggest things and they say what's possible, and is there any conflict there, or was it kind of quite a simple process? Example.
So with reducing exposure of any type of this is usually a sort of hierarchy of measures that start with, you know, the most preferable down to the least preferable from an exposure point of view, but that doesn't always align with what's feasible from a client end. So it's always a two-way discussion. Obviously, you know, targeted mechanical ventilation, which extracts dust from the environment, or reducing any dust generating activity, would be at the top of that hierarchy. But yeah, it was definitely a two-way discussion. All of the measures that we promoted, we essentially sent them a shopping list of measures from the various documents that HSE produce under COSH regs as well, and worked with them to agree what would be most beneficial based on our findings, specifically the fact that we'd found that roaming activities were more at risk than the stationary ones because the dust was being disturbed. The thing about a warehouse is it's not a dust generating procedure in and of itself, it just accumulates over time. So a stationary task was less exposed in this case to the roaming task, which was disturbing that deposition.
Thanks. We've got two questions in the chat now, one from Fatima, and they ask, what could mitigate the dust generation and what impact would general mechanical ventilation do?
So my understanding, so the dust generation that was occurring, so within a warehouse, there's lots of movement of stock in and out. There's vehicles, you know, delivering stock. So there is actually limited amount that in this case could be done to actually eliminate the dust generating procedure. It's called typical warehouse dust. So, you know, general wear and tear to the tire, abrasion of the workplace of the forklift trucks, and the movement of stock and the concrete floor as well. So it was quite difficult to come up with solutions to actually eliminate dust, because it's not a process like other workplaces like manufacturing that has a specific generating procedures. It is just a general accumulation over time. In terms of mechanical ventilation, I'm not an MEP engineer, but my understanding is it can be quite targeted, and you can set flow rates, and you can, you know, set extraction rates and all that kind of stuff. So you can increase the movement of air and increase dilution in the indoor environment quicker than a naturally ventilated solution to keep that air change per hour at a suitable level, which increases or reduces, and you can extract contaminants from the air as well in that way more easily, I think.
And there's another question from Dr. Limpson, who asks, how can you eliminate dispersion within the warehouse during the study? And they wonder if this could affect the data obtained during the study.
Absolutely. So we wanted to come up with a representative view of dust exposure during a typical working shift. So we didn't want to control dust exposure without any activities going on. So we didn't control for that, because we wanted it to be representative of a typical exposure during a typical shift. So that involved movement of stock, which would have disturbed the dust, but that was considered to be representative of what the workers would have been exposed to on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. There's another question, but if you have any more questions, put them in the chat, and perhaps Mark can have a look at them and answer them via the chat, and we'll carry on with our next speaker. So our next speaker is Georgio Farrell, and they're from Southampton Local Authority. They'll be speaking next. If you want to share your screen now, George, and then we can hear from you.
Yeah, sure. Hopefully that's visible.
We can see that, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, it's Teams. Yes, so my name is Georgio Farrell. I'm presenting from Southampton City Council, where I work as the projects lead for everything air quality. And just a quick overview on my career path and what we do in the team. Presented there, but it's my role as a projects lead and working with an air quality officer. We deliver the air quality program, which is a series of projects under the local air quality management regime, and we also have an NO2 plan, which is effectively a non-charging clean air zone. Combined, it's about over 24 projects to improve air quality. As I get on to, mostly focused on ambient air quality and transport emissions. but now leaning towards some of the more nuanced aspects of air quality and impacts, including indoor air, as well as that, we're also responsible for development control, and now beginning to integrate the wider transport decarbonisation agenda. So yeah, just a very quick rundown of the policy basis for local authorities, and it is, as I mentioned, very much focused on ambient air quality. That is where the standards are, and therefore that's where we as a local authority have an obligation to focus our efforts on, and that's where we have our powers and funding. There's not necessarily any indoor air quality standards we as a local authority are obliged to reach. I'm not getting into a debate yet on whether that's the correct thing to do, considering the impacts of air quality indoors, whether that's the correct focus. But that is why our projects almost all focus on outdoor air. And that's reflected in our sort of a very quick overview of the projects that we work on, mostly around cleaning up public transport fleets and encouraging modal shifts and so on. But as you can see there, what we'll be covering later is our wood burning engagement project, which will be the first project we've implemented, which can be considered to be one of those indoor air quality projects we'll hopefully see more of. And again, this is in terms of the policy, you can see there most of what we work on and the departments we work with is all focused on, or virtually all focused on, the outdoor setting and transport specifically. So as I mentioned, we do have a new project which is a first for Southampton, and is an upcoming sort of type of project which is showing sort of popularity across other local authorities, which is mostly on the basis of reducing emissions of particulate matter in the ambient setting, admittedly, and not specifically indoors. But this wood burning engagement project obviously has potential to have a massive impact in the indoor setting on people's health, despite it being funded for and the primary aim to be to reduce emissions from particulate matter into the outdoor setting. As I said, there's clearly massive opportunity here for indoor air quality. So the project was proposed to DEFRA and awarded a grant. We applied as Southampton City Council as the lead bidder, and in collaboration with a sort of neighbouring Hampshire local authorities of New Forest, Winchester, and Eastleigh Borough Council. It was excuse me, it was awarded the grant and is now in its coming to the end of its second year of implementation, being run and project managed by a local charity, Tech, the Environment Centre. The aim of the project is effectively as a behaviour change project. It's to help people make informed decisions on what they burn in an indoor setting in stoves and open fires, but also outdoors in terms of bonfires. And the project has two distinct off and on campaigns, of a summer campaign focusing on bonfires, as an example of some of the material we use on the right. And then during winter, we focus on stoves and open fires. So like I mentioned, it's not necessarily telling people to stop burning completely. It's more making people, empowering people to make informed decisions on what they do burn, because it might be obvious to us, but people still very much see wood burning as a green option and are not aware of the health impacts in terms of particulate matter emissions and other pollutants. And the steps, the quite easy steps they can take to improve the efficiency of burning and ideally stop burning, or you switch to a different heating source. The project itself comprises of sort of typical behaviour change aspects. So there's a comms campaign, mail outs, events, social media, web content, and so on. We've engaged with sort of tens of thousands of people across the boroughs and had a fairly good response. As I said, people generally not aware of the issue, and being quite receptive to actionable steps they can take to improve their burning or switch to a different fuel source. So in terms of some specific challenges that might be quite interesting, and ones I wasn't really expecting, is that many residents, and I did mention New Forest was a part of this campaign, still rely on burning, not necessarily wood, but coal burning. From that, we had a sort of a reassessment of how we approached the project, and we divided the campaigns into a rural and urban sort of different set of communications materials based on the fact that people do need burning to heat themselves. Burning of wood and coal in some circumstances, but again, it's what they can do to do that more efficiently for their health and also to use the fuel better. The response from industry was interesting. That the Stove Industry Alliance quite voracious in their response to the campaign, and I did provide some challenges in terms of them sort of questioning DEFRA statistics for primary emissions, but it's all right, we've managed that well. And yeah, of any comms campaign, it landed mostly well with the majority of people, but either end there'll be a sort of vocal minority opposed to either we're doing too much and we shouldn't be telling people how to heat their homes, or we're not doing enough and to ban wood burners completely. In terms of the former of that, and it's becoming more common, is the cost of living crisis, and quite rightly people are concerned that councils shouldn't be telling people how to burn, even though we're not telling people what to do, we're telling people how to do something more effectively. And that's becoming a consideration more and more, and will do definitely this winter. Luckily, the Environment Centre, who run their campaign with us, are also providing a Healthy Homes campaign and helping people out of fuel poverty. And they do note that most people in that situation don't use wood burners, which maybe also a misconception. On the last point on data, I think it was picked up in the first presentation, but there is a lack of any sort of particulate matter monitoring. I mean, we're in a relatively good spot in Southampton that we have 2 automatic monitors, but that's by no means enough, or enough to be really useful in a comms campaign, where ideally we could say, you know, in your area, particulate matter contributes this, or wood burning contributes this much to PM concentrations, or, you know, if you reduce burning, you could save this much emissions or improve your health by a certain amount. However, we've made an attempt to address this, and in a subsequent round of this DEFRA bid, we were awarded over £300,000 to extend the campaign, so we're going into a 3rd year, and also enhance it with a series of low-cost monitors. We've now procured the company EarthSense, who are delivering 8 low-cost monitors in Southampton and another 6 across the other 3 local authorities, to provide several things: to provide more outdoor air quality monitoring information, as well as a model to complement that, which can estimate PM concentrations on a 10 by 10 grid, a very high resolution model. But also in terms of the indoor setting, we're proposing to use one of these Zephyrs as a case study, and working with a resident to see how different types of burning can impact indoor air quality. And that data should be really useful in making the comms campaign more relatable, I suppose, if you can provide sort of local data that's directly applicable to someone's area, for example, and that could really enhance the campaign. Yes, okay. Now, more generally, and looking into the future, I suppose it's sort of closing thoughts. So we're sort of moving away as a council from, not moving away, maybe a shift in focus towards indoor air quality as well as outdoors. We've seen a gradual improvement in air quality in our outdoor setting through our NOT plan and the action plan, and now we're in a position to start leveraging these DEFRA grants and, where possible, council funding to look at actually exploring how can we focus on benefiting residents' health, and in most cases that's looking at indoor air quality. So we still have to be a bit creative around the funding. Like I said, the wood burning project was mostly about ambient air quality, but we can sort of tailor it so that it does have major benefits indoors. The most recent round of this DEFRA funding, we secured quite a substantial amount of funding to deliver a schools engagement project, and on the same basis that's funded to improve awareness of air quality in schools and fund projects to reduce the impact of pollution around schools, but also be looking at indoor air quality there, again using low cost monitors. And other options there, we've got an air quality action plan update planning on publishing this year, and in there we're proposing, it's currently out for consultation, but we're proposing more engagement work around air quality in the indoor setting, and as part of a wider sustainability policy, our Green City Charter, we're looking at co-benefits in terms of things like a green grid and how we could use that to mitigate or block effectively pollution on key sites. In terms of sort of theoretical possible future measures, again dependent on funding and powers that central government might bestow upon us. You might be looking at, for example, planning conditions on wood burning and ventilation. Could even involve, providing monitors and even air purifiers in certain instances, or air quality audits and so on. There's a lot of things we could do. It's just at the moment there's not necessarily the funding or the power to do it. And yeah, interestingly, we're starting to shift towards indoor air quality more. The central government are sort of showing signs, and this is an excerpt from the latest or a recent consultation on the local air quality management guidance, and it was asking for opinions on whether local authorities should start focusing more on reporting indoor air quality and reporting measures to mitigate it in annual status reports. And that links on to final closing thoughts on challenges and opportunities. So as I mentioned, at the moment there's no strict funding or necessarily powers directly for local authorities outside of sort of smoke enforcement to tackle indoor air quality specifically. As I mentioned, should that be different? Should local authorities be enforcing air quality in homes? I think that's probably a wider debate. And the last point on challenges, as we're looking ahead and looking at more energy efficient homes, is there a risk that potentially there could be a compromise in terms of ventilation, perhaps if not managed correctly. On the flip side, and future opportunities, I did mention that central government are looking to, or seemingly more aware of the indoor air quality issue. The Clean Air Strategy does mention it, and the Environment Act potentially sort of indicates that more should be done, and that can indicate more funding and powers there. And a general awareness, I think, central government in demonstrating providing CO2 monitors for schools, for example, in an effort to improve ventilation, indoor air quality for COVID specifically, but potentially that's a sign of more to come. And that links into the general awareness of indoor air quality since COVID. And in contrast to the last point on challenges, the last point here is that there are co-benefits with the climate change agenda in buildings, is that if it's managed well, we can have efficient mechanical ventilation, or HVAC systems, for example, which can mitigate any issues from the lack of ventilation, or using cleaner heating sources, for example. It does need to be managed carefully. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. I'll include some links there to my details, but we have to take any questions now if we've got time.
Thanks, George. That was really interesting, and it linked on to quite a lot of the opportunities and challenges that Kath mentioned in her introduction slides as well. It was good to see it replicated in your slides. I have a question about the public engagement part of your studies and stakeholder engagement, because I've recently heard more about citizen science projects and this kind of thing, and I find that engaging with the public is a really exciting opportunity to really get the dissemination of these projects through quite effectively, and also to get a feedback and have a two-way conversation. Did you target specific stakeholder groups for the wood burner thing, or was it more of an open dissemination?
Yeah, there was some focus, and that was in terms of what we've done so far, in terms of sort of focusing leaflet drops, for example. We did focus on areas where we know have higher levels of sort of wood burning complaints. For example, we did a sort of very quick GIS exercise to look at where most people complain about smoke from chimneys, for example, and focus there. In terms of this upcoming indoor case study specifically, we'll be looking at people hopefully in those neighbourhoods who have wood burners, and trying to get, like you said, a specific example of someone, a case study where they are, surprised at the impact of wood burning on the environment, and quotes, for example, on, if I do this, I can, improve indoor air quality by this much and reduce the impact on my neighbours. That could be really powerful. Yeah.
And with these studies, are you working with behavioural scientists and this kind of thing to help with that aspect?
No, not specifically behavioural scientists, but the Environment Centre have a lot of experience in engaging with members of the public on sort of area of work, and they've helped us before on no idling campaigns, and like I mentioned, the Healthy Homes scheme. So they've got good experience there. I've also got comms colleagues in the council who are very much experienced in delivering these kind of behaviour change projects.
Got a message in the chat from Honor, who asks if there are any alternatives that you know of for people that rely on burning coal.
In terms of people that do rely on burning coal, I don't think there's any alternatives, as they do have to burn it without potentially retrofitting their homes and getting in sort of boilers and so on. So no, I wouldn't know exactly what that would involve, to be honest, but there are certain things I'm sure that could be done to improve the efficiency of that coal burning. For example, better use of the stoves, and in terms of getting sort of wider retrofits in, I'm sure there's something that could be done, but I'm no means an expert on that.
Okay. Well, thanks for your talk. Again, if you have any further questions for George, then please pop them in the chat, and George, if you can respond to them in there, that'd be great. But we'll carry on with our morning schedule. So next we've got Dr. Christina Rodriguez-Rivero from the University of Cambridge. So if you'd like to share your slides, Christina.
Yeah, I'll try to. I hope you can see this.
Yeah, you can see
presentation mode.
Thank you. That's great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. So yeah. Thanks, Helen, and also thanks for organizing. So yeah, I want to talk a bit about the project I'm working in and how I ended up working in air quality. I'm working in the Department of Applied Mathematics and Theoretical Physics in Cambridge, and we do a fair amount of experiments, which is good for such a department. So my background is actually more in droplets in the micro scale for micro manufacturing techniques, but that touches a bit on that sort of a scale of aerosols. And I also do a bit of mathematical modeling. So I found this project for which I applied last year quite an interesting, a bit of a career change, but also touching on that sort of a scale I was mentioning in terms of droplets. And that was the National Core Study Protect, led by the Health and Safety Executive's Chief Scientific Advisor. And you can find more information online, and I'm working in theme 2 of this project, which is based on transmission modeling for COVID-19. And the description of this theme is more on how the physical environment and the human behavior affect transmission of COVID-19 and how to best control it. And this touches a bit on all the bits and pieces that we've touched on, and also Kath was mentioning this morning, and it's that sort of complexity in between the physical environment, but also our human behavior. So there are some other collaborators, so it's a UK-wide study. So it's great to collaborate with so many people and so many other disciplines. And specifically, my focus is studying the importance of ventilation in transmission risk. So why is this important, and what is the need of why there is a need of studying this? I think I don't need to say that humans and the real world environment are very complex. And then we have that difficult balance, again, that we've mentioned about controlling that aerosol or the exhaled air and ventilation and that sort of thermal comfort and energy consumption and in general, the air quality, especially indoor, but also, we've mentioned, outdoor. There's also a need to understand the uncertainties of the measurements that we're doing and how the environment, for instance, affect the changing environment, the wind, the weather affects also the air quality. There's also a need to check and keep on improving theoretical models to see whether they are really applicable for real world scenarios. And there's also that need to understand the relative importance of all the factors that we're touching on, also in terms of investing for longer term measures and improvements of the systems and to help designers in a way to understand what is the most effective way to proceed. And of course, we also need effective guidance to understand and to evaluate the risk, the various risks of indoor spaces. So my role is basically studying a myriad of processes going on in workplaces and ventilation. So I study different settings, different ventilation systems. I monitor during long term, monitor various parameters. I validate models, and I do some modeling on room space, different spaces and the risk in those rooms. And I do this through quantifying and analyzing some proxies that I mentioned briefly. And I also try and find out what is the best placement of different sensors and how to interpret data. And again, the idea is coming to guidance for evaluating spaces. Some of the diagnostic tools, I'm aware of the time, so I don't want to give many more details, but just please ask me later if you want to know some more about this. What we use, for instance, synthetic schliering, that's for a close range flows, let's say. So we can characterize things like what happens or what's the influence of a mask and the different settings. So there's a lot of physical phenomena involved, such as convection and entrainment of the breath in the body plume, in the heat that the body emits. I also use, again, passive tracers such as smoke, artificial smoke, or CO2, and monitors, as I was mentioning, for environment, like for organic volatile compounds, CO2, or temperature, mostly. And then I'm identifying a lot of challenges with different ventilation systems. So, for instance, instead of mechanical, some more active ventilation systems. We've seen that some of them are designed just for more of a cooling approach, and when we have heating approaches, there are various systems that do not work as expected because of temperature gradient. So there's the generation of what we call a lock-up layer. That could be potentially very risky if there are, again, infectious particles in the room. There's also challenges in natural ventilation, and you may well know of this because it's very, very weather dependent. It depends quite a lot also on the use of the space. We have spaces that with high occupancy and for very long-term occupancy, so that's a bit of an issue. We have to manage that. We have to fight with the geometry of the room in a way. It can get very complex, also with building management systems that control the opening and closing of the windows, and if it rains, it closes everything. And so there's a myriad of things to consider. Then also challenges in interconnected spaces. So there's a large number of variables in these spaces because there are a large number of sources for fresh air and also for contaminated air. So we've seen unexpected connectivity between rooms that sometimes is not too clear to the facilities management or the building management after the building is constructed. It may not be clear in the different layouts and information that they may have of the building. And then there's areas in which there may be low occupancy because it's corridors, but the air or the stale air can linger there for a bit longer because we're talking about, again, circulation spaces with not clear exhaust areas. We've also worked on mitigation strategies after studying different rooms. And this is, for instance, the example of a lecture theatre in which the position of the inlets and the exhaust vents was putting quite under risk to the lecturer in the same front of the room. Also, so we did a couple of changes to try and mitigate, again, that sort of how the airflows were distributed in the room towards that front. Then we, again, as I was mentioning, we need some modeling and checking whether what the models are predicting in terms of geometries of the room and the occupancy that we have is real and it's effective. So we've done a couple of these. We're publishing or ideally publishing these results during this coming year. So please tune in if you want to know more of these models. And then we're also monitoring some other spaces. So we're collaborating with the Ministry of Justice to study prison settings because they were very prone and they are very prone to outbreaks during COVID-19 times. And the connectivity of these spaces is very complex to analyze. So again, we're using monitoring and passive tracing in these spaces. But I'm a bit obsessed now, I guess, with monitoring and CO2. So I get my CO2 monitor with me everywhere. So I've been in the cinema with it, in cars. So sometimes it's very concerning to see high levels of CO2. That means that can affect the alertness of people. And sometimes they increase quite a lot. So ideally, we want something not above 1,000 ppm, ideally. And as we see here, if you can see my arrow, this is in a cinema theatre. So it just goes up to, at some point, almost up to 3,000 ppm. In cars, it can get even worse. So we'll be studying also very soon some van settings in which prisoners move around and how that the transport and the trips affect the transmission risk in these vans. And in terms of the benefits and who can be benefited from this study, I think it's we know this is a general concern for all of us. We need to improve our air quality, especially indoors, and we need to understand the ventilation systems. So again, we're trying to provide some guidance for intervention to improve the air quality and to also reduce airborne disease transmission. And we want in general to provide a fair amount of guidance for users of spaces, so all of us in general, but especially for designers of ventilation systems and buildings, and for policymakers. And it also, this project also affects the wider research community. We're trying to collaborate. We collaborate quite a lot in this project, and we're trying to put some other research projects together. Ideally, we would like to have a tool integrating various parameters and estimating risk that is quite user-friendly, so everyone could have access to it and even evaluate what's going on at home, or have a bit of a better feeling to educate also the population in general about the risk of poor air quality. And in terms of public engagement, we've collaborated. We're trying to do quite a lot of things to reach out. With a good campaign was with the Cabinet Office last November for it was called Stop COVID-19 Hanging Around, and it was for raising awareness about opening windows at times during the winter, especially when at home setting. So with this, I hope I'm not overrunning much, and I want to thank you all. I would love to have questions and discuss further today. And I just wanted to thank also the JK Bachelor Laboratory where I'm working at the moment, and my supervisor, Professor Stuart Deal, and also the NCS Protect organisers. I think that's all from me.
Thanks, Christina. That was really interesting. So many different spaces you're monitoring as well. It's quite remarkable. We've got one specific question about the prison setting that you mentioned from Mark. And he wondered if there was a correlation between high CO2 or ppm and the violence levels inside the prisons.
So that's a bit more complex. So we think there could definitely be a correlation, but we haven't checked that yet. And it's also, there's more ethics involved. So if we have some more time to put some of the projects together, we would like to study that sort of behavior, because we think increased levels of CO2 can, of course, bring situations such as headaches and again, kind of that sort of general discomfort. So that could be potentially detriment for the behavior of the prisoners.
Thanks. I have a more general question. So you've monitored and you've been measuring all these different settings and all these different building types and indoor spaces. How do you then find the process of translating your findings of those different indoor spaces into guidance for policymakers and for workplace health and safety officers?
It's yeah, there's a difficult balance because everything is so different. Like every room has its own characteristics. So we're trying to put more of an understanding about how you have to look into the rooms in different ways. Like, for instance, a room that is internal or a room that is external, the heat loss, what could be potentially the influence of that, and what sort of monitoring you can do under different circumstances to try and have a better idea of how that's behaving and what could be risky, such as thermal certification, for instance. And it's simple to monitor with temperature logging systems that are relatively inexpensive. So we're trying to just like put some kind of clarity in a way on what sort of things you should be looking into in terms of when you enter in a room, and checking how not only the specifications of the ventilation system, but also studying what other parameters are affecting the room and how the environment is interacting with that room in other ways, and try and put that together in a coherent manner.
Yeah, make something very complex into something coherent, like you say.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for all our speakers this morning. There's another question that's just come through, so we'll do that and then we'll have a break. So Dr. Limpsam asks what your observations are on CO2 levels indoor compared to the ambient air pollution. So
so CO2 levels just skyrocket when you're indoor in general. So in terms of outdoor, I've been in, let's say, in London, and if you are in an area in which there's heavy traffic, you can see a bit of an increase from the standard maybe 430 ppm that you would have in a quieter area. But maybe, I mean, it's not that high. I mean, I've been maybe around 500 ppm. Or, however, when you're in an office, if you have your windows closed, and it's true if you're in a relatively kind of middle-sized office, it can get up to 2000 ppm very quickly. So there's definitely a huge difference in that sense when you're indoor and when you're outdoor. I mean, of course, outdoor you have potentially more particulate matter, and so there's definitely some other aspects to air quality in terms of CO2. Indoor, it increases very, very easily and very quickly.
Thanks. So I think there it makes sense for us to have a little break. So if you have any more questions for the speakers from this morning so far, just put them in the chat, and those speakers, I'm sure, will keep an eye on it and answer if they can. But we'll have a break now and reconvene maybe at 10:55, and then we'll continue with 3 more talks from 3 more speakers. So we'll see you at 10:55.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's 10 to 11 now, so I'm starting up again and welcoming you back to this morning's session. We're going to carry on with another 3 speakers. Again, one from the private sector, one from the local authority, and one from academia. So our first speaker, if you're here and you're back from your break, Siobhan, is Siobhan Goodman from Garson. And she'll be joining us. Are you here, Siobhan?
Hello, yes, I'm here.
Hello. You might just share your screen and go ahead, and as applied earlier this morning, if you just put any questions in the chat, I can read them out to Siobhan later. Thank you.
Can everyone see that?
Yeah, that's good.
Fantastic. So, welcome back after the break. I'd just like to start by thanking everyone for the opportunity to present at this really interesting event, Career Paths in Air Quality. So my name is Siobhan Goodman. I'm a Senior Air Quality Consultant at Delta Simons. So a quick overview of my presentation today. I'm going to give a quick introduction to Delta Simons because I'm very much aware that there's a range of speakers here at this event, and so I thought, well, it would be a good idea just to introduce who I am and where I'm from. I'm going to give a brief discussion about indoor air quality, although I'm also aware we've just touched on this as well today. But I'm also going to talk about sick building syndrome, what it is and how we can prevent it. And I'm going to present a recent case study on indoor air quality and occupational health. So a quick introduction to Delta Simons. As part of Lucian Group, we've got over 500 team members who come together as a community of people committed to making a difference to the environment. We're always growing and have a shared goal to protect people and our planet. Delta Simons forms a consultancy branch of the Lucian Group, and we're specialists in providing expert environmental advice and support. We all provide critical insight into environmental challenges, and we develop the framework of solutions for our clients to plan and develop their projects sustainably. We cover many environmental disciplines, including geo-environmental operations, environmental transaction services, environment, health and safety and sustainability, and then environmental planning, which is where the air quality team sits within the company. Within air quality, we cover all aspects of air quality and odour services, and with the potential effect of these on sensitive receptors. But today I'm going to talk about indoor air quality. So while much of media attention is drawn towards the challenges caused by outdoor air pollution and the resulting health impacts on communities, little is often said about the importance of indoor air quality. On average, we spend around 90% of our time indoors, which is a lot of time, and this is either in the home or the workplace environment. Consideration for indoor air quality is not often given or even acknowledged, and this poses a challenge for managing their associated health impacts and their risks. As you can see on the screen, this highlights how important and prevalent these sources of indoor air pollution are in the common home alone. And this includes things like volatile organic compounds from paints and new furniture, household odours and gases, and airborne particles. Indoor air pollution is not just in our homes though, it's also in the workplace too, and something which we need to consider. And this is one of the main areas where we assist our clients through occupational health exposure assessments and their reports of sick building syndrome within their employees. Indoor air quality can be affected by thermal conditions and pollution with various airborne contaminants such as gaseous compounds, fine non-biological particles and bioaerosols, which can all negatively affect the health, comfort and performance of a building's occupants. Understanding and controlling these key thermal measures and common pollutants within the indoor environment, and these include temperature, relative humidity, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, volatile organic compounds, pollen, bacteria, mold and fungi, and virus particles, just to name a few, can help mitigate against the risk of health impacts. But what health impacts can we get from being inside? These negative health impacts can include headaches, fatigue, irritability, dizziness, nausea, fever and chills, difficulty breathing, rashes, and even a runny nose. Whilst many people can complain about at least one of these symptoms within a working day, most typically in the afternoon, many people would actually be unaware of the association of these health impacts with indoor air quality. And as such, there's limited mitigation in place for these to reoccur. This can ultimately affect productivity in the workplace as well, and can lead to increased absenteeism within a business. Sick building syndrome is the name which is the term used to describe these symptoms, and it relates to the duration of time that's spent in a building. And it seems that these health impacts severely compromise indoor air quality. Whilst indoor air quality includes the uninfluenced environment, health effects caused by operational processes within a building, they can also result in inhalation of dust and fumes, amongst other process-related contaminants. So as an example, so I feel tired in the workplace, especially in the afternoon, and this includes in your home working environment, because we spend many hours there as of recent years. I can guarantee many of you will have answered yes to that question. So the next question is then, is your workplace ventilated? Do you open the windows in the afternoon? And what type of ventilation does your office have? Is it one of these typical cassette type aircon systems that you can see on the screen? Does it recirculate the air in the room, or does it draw in fresh air and therefore replenish all of the air that you're breathing? This all makes a difference to the indoor air quality environment that we're in. And a simple action of opening a window just to let in the fresh air can make such a difference to how you feel and how productive you are at work. If it's a winter, a lot of people would say it's a bit too cold to open the window, but a simple solution would just be to put a jumper on and then you'll feel better. It doesn't just apply to properties though. This advice also applies to long car journeys. We all must get tired when we're doing long journeys, so just opening the window to let in some fresh air will really help. We also do occupational health exposure assessments in industrial premises as well, where we look at inhalable and respirable dust and also VOCs. We can attach monitors to employees whilst undertaking their dusty tasks, as they're potentially exposed to pollutants, and we can capture those and advise them accordingly. When we do occupational health exposure assessments indoors in the office environment, we typically consider carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, temperature, and relative humidity. These are all measured using a handheld probe, and then we compare them to workplace exposure limits, which are concentrations of hazardous substances in the air averaged over a specified period of time, and these are set in order to help protect the health of workers. So moving on to our recent case study, the purpose of this project was to identify the effectiveness of office space ventilation across 3 locations within a short period of time. We did this across 3 different office locations for the same client. This project required good time management skills and organisational skills, a lot of pre-planning, and required my ability to think on my feet while doing the work. Baseline indoor air quality measurements of carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, temperature, and relative humidity as heating, ventilation, and air conditioning functional indicators. These were all taken prior to reoccupancy of an office, using a Q-track monitor and testo probes as shown on the screen, with a focus on the various types of meeting room available, one of which you can see. The Q-track monitor was calibrated for at least 10 seconds prior to measurements being taken. This allowed it to calibrate with the surroundings and meant that the device was ready to start accurately monitoring the air in that location. After that, the device would take readings every 5 seconds for a minute, and this allowed an average recording to be taken. Indoor air quality measurements were then assessed against the relevant workplace health and safety guidance to determine compliance, and recommendations were made to make sure that the workplace is safe for the return of employees. Efficient ventilation of indoor spaces is necessary to prevent the onset of health risks related to poor indoor air quality. And these health risks are those that are categorised under the sick building syndrome, as I mentioned earlier. Therefore, monitoring of indoor spaces and the appraisal of the HVAC systems in place are crucial to highlight any areas where improvements can be made within the workplace. This also allows us to advise on the benefit and installation of CO2 monitors, These would alert the occupants to elevated CO2 concentrations and allow them that bit of advice to go and open a window or a door if need be. This project produced some thought-provoking results. Out of 3 offices, 2 of these had adequate ventilation, with all parameters recording below the relevant guidance. However, 1 of these required implementation of improved mitigation measures. For this, a simple solution such as opening the windows in those areas where concentrations were likely to exceed, opening the windows was the recommended mitigation for these. Now, this specific office had an air conditioning system that did not recirculated the same air, and therefore providing mitigation for them to completely change their air conditioning system when they were in a multi-tenanted building was a bit of a tricky one to put forward and very costly as well. Now, for carbon dioxide, indoors, a consistent value of 800 parts per million is likely to indicate that a space is well ventilated. An average carbon dioxide concentration in a room of above 1500 parts per million when a room is occupied, this is an indicator of poor ventilation. So you should always take action to improve this ventilation where these readings are consistently higher than 1500 ppm. Now, a surprising find with this study was that 1 person had been in one of the smaller meeting rooms for the duration of the morning. Now, whilst I was there to do baseline air quality measurements, I obviously couldn't ask the employee at the site to move out because he may have been on a confidential call. However, I went in and took the readings when he was on his lunch break. Now, having a room occupied by 1 person for the duration of a morning, this resulted in concentrations of 1,000 parts per million. Now, the room that the employee was located in was a room for about 4 or 5 different people. Now, if this was the impact that 1 person in a meeting room had for the duration of a morning with concentrations over 1,000 ppm, what impact would 100% occupancy have in that room? So if 5 people were in that meeting room for the morning, we would need to consider better ventilation in that room, and as there were openable windows within that space, that was the mitigation that was put forward. There were several challenges associated with this project, and these included the fact that the measurements were taken prior to occupancy, and so the impact of many people being within the same office is still unknown at this stage, and this makes it very challenging to say for certain whether 100% occupancy would still be achieved safely with these indoor air quality parameters remaining below the thresholds. We also had the challenge of time constraints. What we learned was never to underestimate the time it takes to prepare for site visits like this, how long the travel will take, how long you've allocated on site. And since these visits where I was always rushed off my feet undertaking these, I always allow extra time on them moving forwards, as I very much underestimated how long it would take. The reason for this is you want to make sure that you're capturing every representable room, and so these include kind of open plan desk spaces, the smaller 1-person meeting rooms, your larger conference rooms. And so whilst you're given a site plan in advance, sometimes these are not always accurate, and when you're faced with the site itself and you've had a walk around, then these situations can change. Always allow extra time to be with your site contacts as well, have a site walk over, take some photos and make a lot of notes. So that was a very brief overview of the case study. If you're interested in finding out more about indoor air quality and sick building syndrome, I have written an article about this, which goes into a lot more detail. This is available on my LinkedIn, which you can see on the screen. And so if you are interested, then please do feel free to have a look. Also, if you've got any questions and you'd like to reach out, then please do feel free to drop me an email as well. Thank you for listening and for the opportunity to present at this event.
Thank you, Siobhan. That was really interesting. It's good to have some top tips for when you're doing site visits, because they're always useful and they apply to every site visit, I'm sure, wherever you are.
You really do.
Yeah. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. But I have one that was kind of like the sort of two-way relationship you might have with your clients. And once you've kind of done your monitoring, you've got your data and your results, and presumably you provide recommendations, do you then go back in 6 months later and do more monitoring in some cases to see if those changes have made any difference?
So what we are doing is, once we've done these baseline measurements, our clients are always very interested to find out what the air quality is like, or the indoor air quality is like, before they have people going back in. The next step in these projects would be when the offices have reoccupied fully, they want us back in just to see how high those concentrations increase, and then we'll be able to obviously put in more mitigation if that's needed, or maybe the ventilation systems that they've got at the moment and the openable windows, maybe that is enough to keep those concentrations at bay. So the further work with this would be that we go back and we undertake more studies when it's been occupied. Further work also can be, we go in and we do kind of interviews with employees at a site. If it's in like a kind of commercial, kind of shop-based work, then we can undertake some interviews to see if they've got if they report any symptoms that would fall under sick building syndrome, because like I say, a lot of people may suffer with these in the work, like when they're working, but they might not associate the reasons why. And so by asking these questions, it can tailor the thought processes to be like, actually, yes, it could be the indoor environment that I'm in. And especially if a lot of different people are reporting the same symptoms, then that's definitely something that we can be involved in. And then we can go in and have a look and see if we can put in mitigation for them.
Okay, nice. We've got a question now from Fatima. He was asking, what can mitigate sick building syndrome reporting by facility management with respect to indoor air quality and ventilation?
So with ventilation, the crucial thing is that the air conditioning systems in place are not recirculating. So what that means is there's a fresh air supply quite often on the roof of a building, and then that feeds in through the ductwork of a building, and then the kind of cassette type air conditioning units will be producing fresh air within that room. Now, quite often air conditioning units, as we found doing these site visits, are maintained and managed by the central management of the building, and so our client isn't directly responsible for them and therefore can't change them themselves as such. If you've got openable windows, and obviously our clients can they can open them themselves and they've got responsibility for that. With regard to the ventilation, if it is recirculating and there's nothing that they can do, it would just be putting some training in place to the employees to say, this is when you can use it, making sure that you've got it set to the right kind of temperatures and you're not having it on all of the time. And then you can kind of control it that way.
Nice, thanks. There's some more questions in the chat, but I wonder if you could answer them in the chat, and then we'll continue with this morning's schedule in the interest of time. Thank you, Siobhan.
Thank you.
Sorry. So our next speaker is Anna Garson, and she's from the Clean Air Fund, and she'll be speaking next. Hopefully, if she's on.
Hi, I'm here. Just couldn't unmute myself. Let me share my screen.
Thank you.
So can you see my presentation?
Yeah,
okay.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Is it still, you can see it, right? Not the,
yep.
Okay, yep. Great. Right, so I'm going to talk to you today. My presentation is a bit different than maybe the other presentations, but I first want to give you a quick introduction to the Clean Air Fund. So we are a philanthropic initiative launched in 2019. We're a global organization, but our core work is in the UK, Poland, Bulgaria, India, and we launched in Ghana this year as well. So we are a re-grantor. So we're funded by a coalition of foundations interested in climate change, children, and health. And then we re-grant that funding to partners according to this slide, which is a very, very simplified theory of change. So our work largely falls into 4 buckets, and that's creating and sharing data, building and diversifying demand for clean air, supporting government and business to deliver clean air, and strengthening and increasing funding for the field. And all of that work, of course, is about maximizing the co-benefits of health and climate associated with tackling air pollution. And ultimately, our goal here is policy change. And I wanted to give you this background so you have a sense of how CAF is trying to approach air pollution from multiple angles. And as well, for the purpose of this presentation, just wanted to give you a little bit on what my role is in all of this. So I'm an analyst. My background is generally the charity sector. I'm not an air quality scientist, but a lot of what I do is strategic thinking. So we at CAF, we don't accept unsolicited applications for funding. So we are thinking about our objectives as an organization and within each of our country contexts and how we can approach achieving those objectives. What's the theory of change? So a lot of what I do is about concept development for a project, partner identification, internal and external stakeholder management, especially as projects move through our internal approval process, which is quite rigorous. Then managing the project once it's in place, reporting against our objectives and indicators for success. We're really trying to measure our impact. And we're also trying to gather learnings and to understand what works and what doesn't work. And maybe what works in the UK won't work in Poland, but maybe what doesn't work in the UK will work in India. And it's about replicating and scaling our successes. And of course, taking those learnings and developing next steps. So the project I'm going to talk to you about today came about because we wanted to understand how we can mobilize politicians, ensuring that there's clear demand from voters and giving elected officials clear political license to act. And with those findings, we could develop a campaign to build that demand and push politicians to deliver. So the point here is to develop a strategy for engaging and mobilizing enough people in the right parts of the country to make inaction on air pollution impossible for any political party. And it's based on this principle of the Overton window, which is a principle within political science that is the range of policies on any given subject that are politically acceptable to the population. So for a lot of people in the UK at the moment, the policy solutions for air quality exist outside of the Overton window. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with what's happened in Manchester with their clean air zone. And that policy to people in Manchester, to a lot of people, is radical. And so we want to shift that. We want to make action on clean air seem sensible, popular, and something that the population wants to see. And the idea is that this will push air pollution up the political agenda and will increase the rewards for politicians who deliver. So we commissioned Stonehaven, which is a political strategy consultancy, to look at what we could do to shift the Overton window, with a window, of course, to reducing pollution across the UK. And the objectives for this work were to identify the constituencies in which air pollution is politically relevant, formulate the policies and messages to push the issue up the political agenda, and then design an execution plan for a campaign. And the idea here is that we need to mobilize support from voters by focusing on the underlying values that are driving the wider public and then making links between those values and action on air pollution. And if we do that, we're making clean air policies more politically viable. So Stonehaven conducted focus groups in areas of high air pollution with a focus on swing voters, followed by some quantitative analysis as well. And so based on that information, they were able to divide the voting public into 6 groups based on their attitudes to air pollution. So very, very quickly, I will take you through them. So in the green on the left, we have the committed advocates. They're supportive of clean air policies. Then we have the armchair advocates. These are people who support the principle of clean air, but maybe not necessarily the policies. Then in yellow, we have the winnables. They are unwilling to pay for clean air generally, but they will change their mind when they're told how air pollution affects them. Then we have the reachables. These are people who reject paying for clean air, even when presented with the facts about levels of air pollution in their local area. They generally think air pollution is just too big of an issue to tackle. But they do get on board with clean air policies when they're framed as part of a wider package of measures designed to improve the local community. Next, we have the unconcerned. They believe they can't make a difference to the problem. It's not their problem to solve to begin with. And the last group, of course, is the disengaged. They're ambivalent about air quality and just generally most things. So we're particularly interested in the winnables and reachables in that group. And we're interested in them because these charts show how they voted in 2019 and how they'd vote if there was an election tomorrow. So what you're seeing here in these charts is that they're swingable voters, which means that they're very likely to be the focus of the next few election cycles and the next general election. And Stonehaven then mapped these groups onto their in-house compass. And so the horizontal axis of this compass shows where the different groups sit on traditional left-right values, large state, small state. And then the vertical axis measures people according to their cultural values. So people at the top are anywhere people. They are particularly interested in global issues. And then people at the bottom are somewhere people. So they are more concerned with local issues. You can see the winnables are that small sort of yellow bubble, and then the reachables are inside the big blue bubble at the bottom right. And what's important here is that both of those groups sit in the bottom half of the compass. So we can conclude that they are most interested in their local area, and we can use localism to drive their vote. So what does this mean for clean air? So clean air campaigners across the UK have been doing really, really well at engaging with the advocates, and we need to keep those audiences engaged and mobilized. But we need to work a bit harder to engage the winnables and reachables by using messages that speak to them, while at the same time avoiding antagonizing and splitting the opponents and the disengaged. So we've identified who we're targeting, where do they live? So Stonehaven undertook a huge amount of quantitative analysis and produced a beautiful mapping tool, which shows us where these audiences are located. And this is particularly important because if we're running a campaign, we need to know where. And this tells us that if we want to look at or target the winnables and reachables who are swing voters, we don't need to do a national campaign. We can do a targeted campaign in around 50 constituencies with a high proportion of winnables and reachables who are likely to switch their vote. So we have who and we have where, so what messages? And I think I mentioned some focus groups. Stonehaven conducted 16 90-minute focus groups in areas of high air pollution. There are a few key takeaways here. So the first is that understanding and awareness of the problem of air quality is very low. And people are really not won over by facts and figures. There was a certain point in every group where the moderator said, oh, did you know you live in an area of high air pollution? And the standard response from everyone was, no, that's not true. Second, air pollution feels too big to solve. People have been given a lot of information about something they don't really understand, and what they want is some agency. Third, and this is a bit controversial, but health messaging doesn't work for the majority of this audience. Clean air campaigners need to continue to hold the advocate audiences who are mobilized to act by health messaging, but that's just not as effective with the winnables and reachables. And there was one woman in a focus group who said that her father actually died of asthma-related complications that were made worse by air pollution, but she had no interest in taking any action on air pollution. But what did work were messages related to improving the local community. And this was slightly different depending on location. In the red wall, there's a real sense that things are on the decline and people don't want their kids to have to leave their local area to find opportunities. And then in the blue wall, community is seen as something that's desirable and it's often associated with nostalgia and security. So localism unites these winnables and reachables across red and blue wall seats. And we know that when clean air is associated with improving the local community, you really start to get people's attention. So we know our audiences and we have our insights and we have the very beginnings of a campaign strategy, which you can see here. So we have a clear objective, we know our target audience, and we know what the strategy needs to do. We need to fight on our winning territory, set out the policy pathways, and mobilize the target audiences. And what does this actually look like? It's about changing the narrative to something like clean air, or good air quality is symbolic of something bigger. It benefits every home, high street, school, and community. It's more than just one's personal health. It's solving some of the biggest community challenges, and it's indicative of a prosperous community driving new opportunities and investments. Solutions to air pollution make communities better and will protect and transform British cities. And so the approach for rolling out is a new campaign with a new narrative. And we're in the process of developing that campaign at the moment. We're hoping to roll it out at the beginning of next year in the run-up to a general election in 2024. And we're hoping to really move air pollution up the political agenda, drive action from voters and from politicians to clean our air in the UK. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. That was really interesting and very different to our other talks, so quite complimentary, especially for our discussion later on in the networking session. Again, if you have any questions for the chat, I can see one from Kath already, and I've got one as well. So I'll start with Kath.
Sure.
She was wondering if you've ever done any analysis of attitudes and politics for indoor air quality, as well as the outdoor stuff you've done here.
So we haven't at the Clean Air Fund, just because our mandate mostly focuses on ambient air quality, but our partners, and that was a conscious decision because we felt like our partners in the clean air field are already working on indoor air quality, and we felt like that there was a gap for us to fill in doing what we do on outdoor air quality. But I know that Impact on Urban Health, which is another foundation based in London, they're doing a lot on indoor air quality. So yeah, would be worth looking them up, seeing what they're doing on it.
Yeah, I'm writing them down now. We'll get them in for a seminar maybe.
Yeah.
I've got another question from Fatima as well. So this is for outdoor air quality ingress into homes and workplaces. It would be good to push initiatives for filtered areas for vehicle traffic and school street initiative. Will this benefit those also work from home in urban areas? It's just more of a suggestion, I think, rather than a question. But
I mean, we found from our work, so we fund quite a few. We fund UK 100 and the Conservative Environment Network, which are organizations that work with councillors and local politicians across the country. And we found from them that, and this supports the Stonehaven research, is that things like school streets are really popular with politicians, and they're really popular with voters because they're really tangible, and it's really about the community, and it's quite easy to understand how a school street can improve your air quality and who it's benefiting. So there's a lot of political benefit to those kinds of policies as well.
Got two more questions,
Sure.
and then I think we'll close our morning speaker session. So the first one is from Douglas. He's really interested in your talk, and he's interested to hear more about how you connect air quality to the bigger societal challenges that you mentioned. And in doing so, do you regulate air quality as the direct challenge and instead make it part of other challenges, so like sustainable transport or climate change?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, right now in the UK, it is quite a complicated topic politically because it's being tied to this cost of living crisis, and people from our focus groups and kind of from the news, you can see that people are really tying air quality policies as being an additional expense. They're not there's a real cost to people complying with these policies, and we don't want to make them punitive. So the hope that we're kind of working towards is integrating air quality into the leveling up agenda, integrating air quality into net zero, which is something that local authorities are already doing. So how can we make air quality seem like it's something that's benefiting communities and integrate it into things that are already happening as well? We, Clean Air Fund, recently produced a report on what's it called? World Health Organization PM 2.5 targets. Where we produced a report with Imperial College London around the policy pathways to achieving WHO 10 in the UK. And the report found that we could get there by 2030 with the existing planned policies that the government is proposing. So we don't need additional policies. We just need to really get behind what's already being planned and implement it, you know, and put some real robust funding and powers behind it as well.
Yeah, move forward and drive the change. I'm going to leave the questions actually now because we have one more speaker before we go into our networking session. So Anna, if you'd like to answer those questions in the chat, that would be great. And if you have any more questions for Anna, just pop them in the chat as well. And then last but not least today, we have our final speaker, Dr. Desmond Lim, and they're from the University of Southampton, and he'll be speaking next.
Share my screen first. Is this working?
It's just loading. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. So my name is Desmond. I'm from the University of Southampton, and I'm currently a postdoc. So this is one of the projects that I've been working on recently. I'm going to share a bit about what I've been doing. So what I work on is probably quite different from the rest of the presentation this morning. So this is the problem I'm looking at. So if you were to look at public transport platforms, such as the London Tube or the Heathrow Airport, for example, there is a very high human traffic. You're looking at 2 million passengers using the London Tube on a daily basis. And in the Heathrow Airport, it is about 200,000 people. And you have places like auditoriums, lecture theaters, you have a kind of like indoor settings with a very high concentration of people. So what happens is if you have some type of hazardous material being released in this type of very crowded places, this is actually a very big threat to the public health, and it also represents a significant threat to the economy, because you have to shut down the places, you have to do thorough cleaning and decontamination before you can put the services back online again. So there is a demand for accurate and fast prediction of pollutant dispersion, and this is actually quite essential for national security. Now, the issue is that most models right now, the way we try to predict this pollutant dispersion is by assuming that this eddy diffusivity to be isotropic and homogeneous. So what does this term over here mean? So if you were to imagine a cup of coffee and you were to pour in some milk, and if you were to let the milk slowly diffuse throughout the entire cup of coffee, it will eventually mix well, like maybe after 5 minutes, for example. And this is something that we know should happen, right? But we don't want to wait 5 minutes usually. So what we do is to take a teaspoon, we put it inside coffee and start to stir it, right? So what we do is to introduce turbulence into the coffee to try and improve the mixing. And when we do this, we are going to be able to increase the turbulent mixing rate. So this term here, eddy diffusivity over here, this basically characterizes the rate of turbulent mixing. So in most of the mathematical models out there, that is able to have very accurate, very fast prediction of pollutant dispersions. We are still relying on an assumption that this term over here, it is isotropic and homogeneous, and we don't actually tie it to physical processes. So what do I mean by this? So if you are in an airport, for example, in a departure hall or the arrival hall, where you expect to have a lot of people, but they are mostly sitting down or they're not really moving around, and you compare it to another place like the transport platforms, the London Tube, for example, where it is also very crowded, but you expect a lot of people walking around. So the models right now, we do not account for all these type of human movements and activities. We also do not account the size of the space relative to all these motions. And this is I think one of the limiting factors to how accurate we can be in all these models. So my work is all about this one number here, this one parameter, and I'm trying to refine such that we can have even more accurate predictions of pollutant dispersion in indoor spaces. So I'm using experimental methods. So I'm using like a scaled indoor room in a water tunnel, and I'm releasing dye as a proxy for the pollutants. And I use a technique called planar laser induced fluorescence, PLIF in short, to try and measure the concentration of the species, which is C over here. I also measure the velocity of the flow itself using a technique called particle image velocimetry. So by simultaneously measuring concentration and velocity, I can then find out what is the steady diffusivity. So what I'm trying to do now is to try and associate this term here with human processes in the case of like a very high crop density of moving humans and of different types of scenarios. And I'm trying to condense all of this and try to represent this coefficient in a more in a way that is linked to all these different fundamental flow processes. So there are a few key beneficiaries to my work. The main thing that I'm trying to do is to try to approach this problem from a fundamental perspective. So this will actually allow the knowledge to be applied to a wide range of problems instead of being applied to only a very specific room model or ventilation system, right? And the knowledge that is generated is going to be contributed directly towards increasing the accuracy of current models and simulations. So I work quite closely with DSTL and DFT, and what we do is to compare my experimental results and measurements with their mathematical models, and we try to see if we are able to improve the accuracy of their eddy diffusion models, for example. And academic collaborators as well. So we try to look for beneficial collaborations with groups working with on similar problems. And one thing that we are starting to work on recently is outreach programs. So we try to raise the awareness and the visibility of the research. So to conclude my presentation, I just want to talk about some of the challenges I face and lessons I've learned. So I find that research objectives can very often expand beyond the original scope because of what we learned throughout the process of the research project. And there is actually a lot of topics that I want to further explore, but there is quite limited time and resources. So my future plans are really to try and expand my networking and seek new collaborations, to apply for additional fundings to look at different types of problems related to the indoor dispersion. I'm also looking at recruiting postgraduate researchers and as well as establishing research groups to look at all these different topics. Yeah, so that's basically my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Desmond. That was really interesting as well. We've had a good variety today. I have a question about if you can go back a few slides just so I can see the setup. It seems that it would be useful for you because you collaborate with so many people. How do you understand the movement of people in these spaces? Do you look at CCTV? Are there models of the way people move in different spaces? How do you account for that fact?
Yes. So my experiments are scaled experiments. I'm using cylinders moving at similar Reynolds number to humans to represent the human influences. Yeah. Okay. And this whole room is basically scaled by 1:30 compared to the actual room itself. So the whole thing is actually in a lab, and I'm not actually monitoring real people. Yeah.
And then obviously yours is in water here. And then how do you translate movement in water to air quality? Is there just into air? Is there just one conversion factor or?
So I think the main thing that we need to look at is to make sure that the Reynolds number of the flow is similar so that you have dynamic similarity. I also look at the geometric similarity so that I can scale the room to the actual applications. And then we look at things such as the air change per hour. So we try to match this with the typical air change per hour of a train station, for example, or an airport. So we try to match all these different parameters, and we try to match the same parameters for the eddy diffusion models that the STL is using. And then we can compare the results directly, and we try to come up with improved questions.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that does answer my question. Thank you. That was good.
Yeah.
If anyone else has any more questions for Desmond, then please put them in the chat. But the next part of this morning is to move into a networking session. We're going to move on now and have the rest of the session chaired by Honor from the IAQM, if Honor's on the call, hopefully. And she'll be sharing your questions if you want to ask any to our panel. And our panel today is Carl Hawkins, who's a consultant, John Newington from DEFRA, and Kath Noakes from the University of Leeds. And they'll be introducing themselves first and then answering any of your questions. So hopefully Honor is here somewhere.
I am.
Yeah, she is. Good.
I am.
So I'll hand over to Honor now and say goodbye for myself. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Helen. Well, that was very, very interesting talks we had before. I was at the Wonder call, and I noted a couple of words that's been shared with me that was insightful, diverse, different. You thought also it was showing very integrated approach to air quality, and the talks which you have heard also showed you how air quality could be applied to different areas that touching our lives in so many different ways. So I think it was a really great sessions. We're recording those sessions, so if you join in later, I'm sure that will be shared and you could actually go back. Now we've got very exciting session in front of us where I will be able to give voice to you, and you will be able to ask questions about the career in air quality. So we've got our panel. So we've got Carl, John, and Kath today. They all very well established in their line of jobs. So Carl is independent consultant, which is slightly different because normally when you work on consultancy, we normally, as a consultant, we work for the companies. So we thought it would be great to hear from Carl how it is to be independent consultant. We've got John from DEFRA, so again, slightly different pathway of career. We would love to hear what kind of skills, what kind of responsibilities you have, John, in everyday life, and Kath, we already heard your presentations, very inspiring, you very known in the air quality industry. So again, this is the academia side. So I would encourage you to unmute yourself and ask the questions, because you have this great opportunity now to really dip into knowledge of those people which they've been in this line of job for quite a long time. And if you wonder which direction you would like to go, this is your opportunity really to ask the questions. Pop in your questions in the chat as well. I will be monitoring that. Helen, I know you disconnected, but if I would miss any questions from the chat where I am leading the conversation with the panels, please flag that up to me.
I will do.
It would be very helpful, or just unmute yourself and read them. And I will pass now to Carl to start introduction. So if you all could give a 2 minutes introduction about yourself and the type of job you are doing.
Great, thanks, Honor. So I'm Carl Hawkins. I'm based in London, and I've spent 35 years working in consultancy. I started life as an environmental biologist degree from Queen Mary University of London. And then I had a bit of time without work and was offered a volunteer position with the United Nations doing ground truthing of satellite imagery in Sudan. So I went off to Sudan for 6 months and counted trees and looked at vegetation, came back and processed that data. And as part of that, the team had an ecologist who worked for a consultancy called Environmental Resources Management, ERM. So he said, oh, I've got some work at ERM you could help me with. So he got me on as a freelancer working for ERM for 6 months, counting trees again, this time around Milan airport, to find out what the composition of the tree species were. around that airport where they were hoping to expand. And in those days, we're talking the mid-80s, ERM had one computer which was shared between the ecology department and the air pollution department. So I got into air pollution modelling because I happened to use the same computer as the air pollution modeller, and he was a bit busy, so he taught me how to run the models. And then I switched over to the air quality team, and I spent 15 years working with ERM in the air quality team and the impact assessment team, doing EIAs and doing air quality modelling and monitoring, etc. And then in 2000, I decided I wanted to be freelance, to have the flexibility to spend more or less time working as I could manage my own time better, I think. And yeah, since then I've worked for myself, 22 years working for different companies in different types of work. So I do air quality work, but I also manage environmental impact assessments for an oil company. And I'm also a member of the Institute of Air Quality Management, same as Honor, and we both sit on the committee, which has a number of subcommittees, one of which produced the Indoor Air Quality Guidance, which is freely available to you on the IQM website. So if you're interested on understanding more about indoor air quality or have to assess indoor air quality, we have a methodology there that we propose to help consultancies, because we wanted to try have a consistent way that people would assess indoor air quality as part of consultancy work. So it's a very high level document, and if you're new to it, then it's a good start. And yeah, thanks very much. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. So John, maybe you could introduce yourself next.
Sure, yeah. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet some of you out in the breakout area. So I'm John Youngton. I'm the head of evidence in DEFRA's Air Quality and Industrial Emissions team. And so DEFRA's responsibility, as I'm sure you're aware, is to deliver policies that bring us into compliance with the ambient air challenges that we face, so outdoor air. And I guess my main responsibility is providing or ensuring the team provide advice to ministers with the most up-to-date science, up-to-date evidence, so that we can give ministers the best information available to make sometimes quite tricky and challenging decisions. In order to do that, I manage a team with a range of professions. So it includes economists, social researchers, data scientists, statisticians, scientists, obviously, and then operational researchers. And when I came into government, I wasn't really quite sure what an operational researcher was, but they're a team that, or they're a profession that look at processes and functions and are able to sort of categorize and assess problems. So it's about assessing a problem and breaking it down into sort of manageable chunks. I've probably done the profession a disservice with that explanation, but I hope that gives you an idea of what they're about. So that sort of team, I think the importance of stressing that I manage a multidisciplinary team is that you need to bring in lots of perspectives. So the evidence base is very broad. We heard from Clean Air Fund about a lot of the social elements, really important, as well as the science underpinning, understanding what the problem looks like. My route into government was quite convoluted. So I started my career as an ecologist, and then did some research into climate change, soil biodiversity, and then from there moved into the Environment Agency and did regulation of waste sites, water abstractions and that kind of thing, so a bit more regulatory. From there moved into a local authority where I carried out like contaminated land work, environmental permitting with the Part B sort of side of things, the air quality action plans and climate change and carbon reduction plans for the council. And then from there moved into central government, where I ran the monitoring network for the UK, amongst other things, and then I gradually sort of moved up within DEFRA, up 3 grades. Had an opportunity with EU exit, so I did some project management leading during the year, the Brexit work, and here I am now managing the evidence team. So I'll leave it there.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Kath, we already heard from you, but give us some introduction into the pathways, your pathway really into air quality.
Yeah, hi everybody. So yeah, to give you a bit of background, I'm an engineer. I've always been at the University of Leeds, which is quite unusual in academia because normally people move about, but I went there when I was an undergraduate student in mechanical engineering department and didn't actually manage to leave yet. So I actually started in a different field. So my PhD was on computational fluid dynamics modelling, but for industrial process flows. So thinking about coating of products and drying of products. And I moved into the air quality field as a postdoctoral researcher, almost by accident, that I was looking for a postdoctoral role on computational fluid dynamics. And I was also looking at industry roles, and I was offered a post looking at using modelling air disinfection systems for controlling tuberculosis in buildings. And it was a very different thing to something I'd done before. It obviously applied the fluid dynamics that I knew, but I didn't know anything about ventilation at that point. I didn't know anything about the biological side of anything. But I took that role and really enjoyed it and found it was really rewarding working on something that was far more complex, I think, than the sort of industrial process stuff, which is, very well, I mean, they were still complex, but could often be very well defined, because all of the indoor air side of things has people in the mix, and that messes everything up, to be honest, makes it more complex. So, and it was the thing that I realized then I loved doing. So I developed as a postdoc there, developed up risk modeling work. And then in 2007, I was appointed as a lecturer. I was then teaching building services engineering, so focusing on the whole raft of things around ventilation, heating in buildings, and things around indoor air quality. And over time, I've just built knowledge from interacting with people in lots of different fields, working collaboratively on various grants and projects. Most of my funding has focused on airborne infection, but not all of it. So we have had some projects which have focused much more on sort of general ventilation and air quality, including the Breathing City network. So I'm now a professor at Leeds. I don't do anywhere near as much hands-on as I would perhaps like to. That's, I guess, inevitable as you go further up a tree. And I then work very closely with colleagues, with postdocs, PhD students, undergraduates, and then people in lots of other places as well, to run multiple projects, and very cross-discipline. So trying to bring different techniques into things. So we've got both experimental modelling, and experimental stuff ranges from sort of lab scale chamber studies through to field work, but then also now more collaborating with microbiologists, with architects, with behavioural scientists, clinicians, a whole range of people to bring this sort of interdisciplinary perspective on indoor air problems. So that's me. Excellent. Thank you so much. I will ask if we have any questions from our audience at this point. If not, I will ask a question, and I would like to find out what would be one piece of advice you could give to someone who is starting from air quality, just to progress really in your line of job. So if you could maybe share with us what would be the most important thing you could share. Maybe John, I will ask you first.
I think it would be to find the thing that interests you and gives you passion, and then pursue that, because while you're pursuing that, you're learning all sorts of transferable skills that you can apply in all sorts of roles, I think just seeing the number of people from different backgrounds here, you can see, I mean, air quality is a really wicked problem. It needs input from all sorts of professions, all sorts of approaches. So I think there's plenty of job opportunities to make a difference on air quality. So do something that you're passionate about. You know, air quality impacts ecosystems. So potentially there's broader sustainability challenges as well. So I think, you know, your world is your oyster, but do something that gives you that you're passionate about.
Excellent. Kath.
Yes, I would absolutely agree with what John said there, that to follow the thing that you're passionate about. I know that, you know, over the years I've had multiple projects, some of which have been in areas that to be honest, I've been less interested in, and it is much harder to deliver a good project in something you're less interested in. And, you know, it's I would always say, you know, sort of not so much just stick with what you know. That's not quite the same thing. It's follow the things that interest you. But I think also to make sure that you know, it isn't essential that everybody must work with everybody. You know, you don't have to be in a big interdisciplinary team. But I think it's really important to build an awareness of what else is going on. So finding ways to read around the subject, to attend, you know, events like this, to attend networks and conferences and things is really helpful. And I think I always find when I go to a conference or something, I spend an awful lot of that time just reflecting on what I do myself by listening to what everybody else is doing, because it allows you to sort of get new nuggets of ideas and put what you do into perspective and things. So I would always say, yeah, try and follow your passion, but then, you know, be aware of what else is happening in the field and the context that it all sits in.
Thank you very much, Kath. Carl.
Yeah, well, from a consultancy's perspective, they always say consultants say yes and then work out how to do it after they've said yes. And there is a bit of that, I think, that we've all experienced in our careers, because we've all come from an area where we didn't end up. So I would say, you know, say yes to opportunities. If you've got a particular career path in mind, it doesn't really matter if you don't start on that road. You probably end up there if you keep trying. So if something seems slightly less relevant to where you would like to be, then maybe it's still a good thing to have. And John's point about transferable skills, you know, I mean, I learned to be a botanist to recognize plants, but I do actually use that in my air quality job because of the air quality impacts on plants. So I'd say, yeah, say yes to things and just give them a go, because what consultancies want is experience, and they never quite know what experience they want, to be honest. So if you've got a broader experience, you can be very useful to them. And the other thing to keep in mind is air quality is an absolutely massive field, and you can't do it all. You know, you've got everything from nitrogen deposition to climate change to indoor air quality. There's a whole range of different areas, and you can't possibly hope to know about all of them. So you know, pick something and try not to be a generalist of everything in the air quality field.
Thank you very much, Carl. I think it's a really important point on that kind of having transferability of your skills, and that's something which we learn years ago might actually come back to us in 10 years time, and we find it useful. I find that myself as well, just really going through different type of job in different type of industry, all related to air quality. So we've got a questions from our audience. Is from Joy, and she is currently doing her PhD in air quality, and she's waiting between academia and industry. And her question is to each of you: how did you decide which route to take, and how you got any advice, and do you have any advice for transitioning from academia to industry?
I can go first if you like.
Yes.
I've obviously stayed in academia. In a way, it wasn't quite a conscious decision, though. It was accidental. I was looking for industry roles at the same time as I was looking for postdoc roles, and I could have probably gone either way. In fact, I was offered a job at the same time I was offered a postdoc in Leeds, I was also offered a job at HSE, and I could have very easily taken that job and ended up down a different route instead. I think, I mean, every pathway has its plus points and its minus points. I guess academia brings a certain amount of autonomy and flexibility, but at the same time, it especially early career, brings uncertainty. It's very easy to see people who are successful, and then you forget that behind that success there's a CV of failures that goes with it. So there's quite a pressure on publication, on chasing down funding. Having said that, when you get it, it's a good feeling, and it's great to have that ability to do. I think I would also say not to be too focused on academia and industry as being completely separate. I mean, yes, there are different rules of the game in different places, but increasingly I think there's a lot more collaborative working goes on now, and I think the idea that there's one route's better than another route, it's just not true at all. I think you can have a very rewarding career in either, and you can move between them. I mean, I think the challenge with moving between any organisation, whether it's academia into industry or industry into academia or academia into policy, is learning, I guess, the acronyms and the rules and the ways of working in that field. But that's inevitable anywhere, and it is just about learning how an organisation works as much as anything. So yeah, I wouldn't be too concerned about the two as being separate, and again, follow where the interest takes you. If a job looks great, follow where that takes you.
Thank you, Kath. Carl, do you want to add anything?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I didn't decide. I didn't get offered an academic position, so I decided to, had no choice really. But I agree with Kath. I think that there's a lot more overlap these days between academia and industry or consultancy, and they are very different jobs, and you're doing different things, but in a way you are doing the same thing in that you're looking to solve a problem of one kind or another. It's just that the academic side is a bit more at the cutting edge, I would say, because industry and consultancy relies on the academic community to give us some of the solutions that we don't have. And working for a consultancy, as Honor and I both do, you sometimes feel you never get to the 100% solution. You've got to get it done quickly. You've got to be client focused. It's a different skill to manage that. And if you're not happy with only getting 80% of the way and saying that's good enough, that's going to be a problem in consultancy. But in academia these days, as Kath said, you've got to publish papers, you've got to get funding. There's the same kind of financial pressures to think about there as well. And also, if you want to do both, then certainly I know people that have gone backwards and forwards from one to the other. So if you'd spend 10 years in academia, you're very useful to industry and consultancy, because you're much more of an expert than somebody that spent 10 years doing a lot of generalist stuff, and vice versa. If you're in consultancy or industry for 10 years and then you join academia, you bring those skills to academia. So I would say, keep your options open and take something that appeals to you, and don't think you've got to be there for the rest of your career.
Excellent. John?
Yeah, so I guess I had that choice. So I'd been working for one of the NERC Centres for Excellence, Centre for Population Biology. Was at the point of being offered a choice between doing a PhD or sort of basically changing career, really. And at the time, it was more personal factors that came into play for my decision. So I was around 28 at the time, and the thought of doing a PhD and then going into postdocing where I wouldn't know where that was, potentially it could be international. Family commitments were starting up, and it just didn't feel right from a personal perspective. And that's mainly what sort of drove my main sort of decision at that time. But I'd really, want to support what Carl was saying there about not feeling like the door is shut with these decisions. It's not, there's a whole new pathway is going to open to you, and it's not necessarily going to mean you can't come in back to academia later on through different routes, and you'll be a different person at that point with new skills and a different perspective that might actually go in your favour. So I think optimism is the touch word, isn't it?
Thank you very much.
I just add a little bit. So I noticed Mark has written in the chat about do both, you know, being a consultant and being a research fellow. I mean, I think that's quite, you know, there are routes to do both. I think the other thing there is, you know, think about what it is in your role that is important to you. You know, actually, if you could never go to a conference again, would that be a problem? And if it is, then that doesn't mean industry's out by any means. There's plenty of industry routes to go to conferences, but you'd be looking for employers that would allow you to do that. Or if actually being involved in research directly is important, then, you know, again, looking for roles that allow you to keep elements of some of the things that you really want to do are really important.
Yes, that's very valuable. And I think adding from myself, and I work for local authority, I work for consultancy, I work for the clients. I went through the whole spectrum. And I also actually give lectures at university in Brighton. So I see I see myself like being in the room with 99 doors, which they open. And my role is to go to each of these doors and shut them or keep them open. And from my perspective, one piece of advice is nothing is forever. And if you go one route and you like it, keep going. If you don't like it, you can always go side, you can always go back. So I think it's we sometimes get into the jobs and we're thinking this is it, but it's not. There's always something different. So think about it maybe this way. I've got some other questions in the chat. So I've got a question here. I have just started, sorry, my chat moved. I had just started working for consultancy firm, and we will be using indoor air quality guidance in one of our projects very soon. Do you have any advice, things to keep in mind while applying? Okay, this is about indoor guidance. How to apply the indoor guidance in real life project?
Shall I take that one since
I get back into the career. Sorry, I didn't read it quickly before.
Yeah. Well, so keep in mind it's a draft in the sense that, you know, it's written as a volunteer effort by a load of people like me and Honor, and it's got to be tested. So keep in mind that if it doesn't work for you, that's okay. You know, you can change. But also, if some of the things in it don't quite fit with what you're doing, don't feel you can't add or modify some of the methodology we've got. It's just an idea of how you might assess indoor air quality in a consultancy environment. There was nothing that we could find that would tell you how to do that. So, you know, see if it works for you, and if your particular situation it doesn't work, then it's quite okay to try something else. And also, if you do have any thoughts or suggestions on it, please do pass them to myself or Honor, because we do update the guidance as we go along, and we have tested the guidance on various projects before we published it, but obviously we couldn't cover all the possibilities. So I would say, yeah, don't treat it as something that's set in stone. It's a voluntary guidance, and it's only just started to be used. So I'm sure we will find situations where it doesn't work very well, and we may well end up producing an update. But great to hear that you're using it, and please let us know if it works or it doesn't.
Thank you very much, Carl. Actually, the next question is for you. We're getting back into the career and pathways. A question from Christina, just wondering, what is the best way to find opportunities for part-time consultancy in this field, moving from academia?
Well, I mean, I would say all the consultancies I know are desperate for people at the moment, and I work on both consultancy side and the client side, and I'm finding that a lot of consultancies are rejecting my invitations to bid for work because they're just too busy. And that means they haven't got enough people. So I would say, you know, search the web, find some consultancies that seem to fit your expertise and interest. And, you know, there's massive ones like ACOM and ERM and others, and there's tiny small ones with 10 people, 5 people, and everything in between. So find a company that suits you. Lots of different companies have different ways of working. Companies have different pay structures and different opportunities to work in the UK or in the rest of the world. Have a look at their websites, and a lot of them do have jobs there at the moment, and a lot of them are very flexible in terms of part-time working because they are desperate for people. So if you only want to work 3 days a week, that's still okay. And then just make an approach. You know, there's lots of jobs advertised. If there aren't, then still make an approach, by the way, get some contacts, and even if they've got nothing now, they might have something in 6 months' time. But you know, in terms of putting your CV together, think about, you know, what are your transferable skills? What are the things that you know that can be useful to clients? Try and think, put yourself into their mind so that your CV is something that stresses the skills that you have that would be useful to either the consultancy or the clients that they work for. And do the research, you know. So if they only work for local authorities, you don't really want to be talking about oil and gas projects. But if they tend to work for major industry or infrastructure projects or whatever, then, you know, try to think about how your skills relate to their services. Don't just send a general CV to everybody.
Thank you very much, Carl. I can add to this, use your network, use the LinkedIn, get in touch with people. I got myself jobs just basically by speaking to people saying, I'm looking for opportunity. Do you have something? Or even just introducing yourself on LinkedIn. I think you have to be proactive these days, and there's lots of different channels to do that. And conferences like that, it's one of the ways of just basically get involved, meet people, see who is there, see who is in the room, and ask the questions. So I've got another question from someone who is so it's quite special question about the actually getting into the Irish air quality area, but I think the general question is, if you got an experience of working in air quality in different country, and then you try to move to a country like UK or Ireland, what would be your advice to get into this when you struggle with those skills that are transferable from different country? And I can relate to that. I'm from Poland. I studied in Poland. And I I wanted to move into UK, but there is a challenge for foreigners. Do you have any advice on this side?
I mean, I guess I can comment a little bit from, I mean, I guess experience in academia is, I mean, I think what you said earlier about making sure that you share what you're doing on things like LinkedIn, going to conferences, using sort of connections, say on social media, to start conversations. Often it's quite good when you actually go to something in person. You meet the people you've had some connection with on social media, and it gives you a starting point for those conversations. I think the other thing within academia, particularly if you're looking, you know, if you're working in an industry type sector but you want to interact with academics, is to think about the different ways in which you can. So I mean, you know, approaching people with, you know, actually would be interested in co-supervision of undergraduate or master's projects and things can be quite a good way of starting to build a relationship. Whereas, you know, I get people who email me and say, hey, we've got this great product, would you like to test it? And I tend to ignore those ones. So thinking about ways in which, you know, you can start to build relationships with people. It is very context specific, I think. But yeah, I mean, I think an awful lot of the connections that we make are through conferences and other type networks, which are the places to really meet people.
Anything to add from you, Carl or John, on this one? How to? support that kind of transition?
I think I'd agree with Kath that it's probably your best tool is that networking. Maybe depending on what sorts of type of work you're interested in, there is that sort of cold calling and approaching area, companies either that you're interested in working for, but also potentially local authorities or central government. And often there are opportunities to do placements. You can sometimes get chances to work shadow, maybe, and just to understand sort of the ways of working of a particular organisation or a particular, that might help then sort of understand where some of these maybe some of the barriers are in understanding different ways of working. Maybe that might help. But I think the key thing is to put yourself forward, and it's really challenging though, isn't it? When you keep getting knocked back, getting that first step in, you have to have quite a lot of resilience. So I guess it's also having a good, strong personal network with your sort of friends, family, or your local support, just to help you through that.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I think from my experience of recruiting people, the people that are highest in your mind are the ones that you think of. So, a no is not really a no; it's a yes, but not yet. So, keep plugging away. Keep contacting the same organisations every 6 to 12 months if that's where you really want to be, because everybody else will be doing that. And if you're not, at the top of the pile, and then they'll find somebody else. So keep trying, and don't think that just because they've told you no, it means that they never want to have you. It's just that there isn't the opportunity at the moment. But also, there's a lot of companies these days where it doesn't matter where you are. I mean, I'm working with a company where people are in at least 5 different countries, and we never meet in the same place. And somebody wants to live in Sweden, but the project's in the UK. They stay in Sweden and they do the project remotely mostly. So ways of working because of the pandemic have changed significantly for lots of organisations. So unless you particularly want to get into the Irish market, you don't necessarily need to restrict yourself to only opportunities in Ireland.
Yes, and from my experience, as I am the foreigner who actually moved, like you said, from different country to UK, I have to say, just take note from the answer and think what is the blocker? Why there is a potential blocker you're not considered? Maybe this is a local experience, and then just try to think how you can close this gap. I offer my time for free at the beginning to just get the experience from the UK. And I just thought, okay, maybe I will be working for free for another month or 2. I will survive. I had part-time job doing something different. So I don't know, think maybe a little bit out of the box, what is the blocker and how you can just work on this, just from my small insight into this. If you think about, and the world is changing, we are living in this different world now where people, they're more likely change careers because we do have such a wide opportunity to network. Sometimes you don't need to look for a job, the job will come to you. You are very easily contactable. Bearing this in mind, what would be the key 3 skills you can point as a skills that the young professionals should work on to progress and be wanted in this job market going forward?
Well, in consultancy, I think it's really important to be able to write well, because you'll be spending a lot of your time doing that. As one of my early managers once told me, we're producing a document, the client's paying £50,000 for it. He doesn't really expect a spelling mistake in it. You wouldn't if you were buying a book for £50,000. So writing well, focusing on that. And of course, if you're applying to a consultancy and you've got a CV with a spelling mistake in it, that's going to stand out quite significantly as a negative. So I'd say that's one thing in consultancy you need to, as I said at the beginning, you say yes and then work out how to do it afterwards. There is a flexibility in consultancy where you are asked to do something that you might not have the skills to do, to feel comfortable doing it. But you know, consultancies don't have people sitting around doing nothing. So everybody's busy all the time, and that means if a job comes in and the right person's not free, the wrong person's going to get given that job, and they're going to have to work out how to do it. So flexibility and adaptability is good in consultancy. And if you really want to work in one topic that you know very well, consultancy isn't really the place to be, I would say. And I can't think of a third one, but I'm sure there is.
That's fine. Kat?
So from an academic perspective, I mean, I think just following what Carl said, writing is important. You're going to have to write, you know, whether it's writing a thesis, whether it's writing papers, whether it's writing reports, you will have to write, and accuracy with that writing is really important. I think going with that is the wider communication skills. So, you know, you don't have to come in as the world's best presenter, but learning how to present and learning those skills is important. Obviously, technical skills are going to be important. You know, those technical skills differ in different bits of the field, but you know, having some baseline that's going to allow you to develop those technical skills is going to be important, and to use those skills. And then I think one of the most important things in academia is in the ability to kind of push through and make things happen, and take responsibility for making a project happen. So, you know, if you just sort of sit back and wait for somebody to tell you what to do, it won't happen, because everybody's so busy. And so actually, you know, if it's your PhD project, if it's your MSc project, if it's your postdoc project, or if you're, you know, the new PI on a grant, all of them basically require you to grasp hold of that project and make it happen. And you might find that sometimes you're dragging your way through some, you know, it's like dragging through treacle trying to get things to happen. But you have to be the one who makes the phone calls, who sends the emails, who makes something happen, because it won't do it by itself. It won't happen any other way.
Excellent. Very good piece of advice. John?
So in civil service, we've got what are called behaviours or competencies. And I think there's three that really spring to mind, and it all comes really back to your transferable skills. So your individual skill sets in terms of your data skills, or you know, your specific science knowledge, I think that goes with you and can be used in a specific role. But there are a whole range of other roles where and these competencies are common to them all. So there's working together. So that's being able to network and collaborate, because in government you're needing to do that across NGOs, other government departments, involved administrations, internationally. There's a lot of collaboration and working together. And that's all about influencing others as well, so delivering through others. So one of my roles and my team's role is to engage with the wider evidence community, because we don't have the resources to deliver everything. We rely on people like Carl, like Kath, to bring together a whole range of evidence. Then there's big picture, so understanding context for your piece of work and how it fits in with the wider sort of policy landscape, or the wider landscape in terms of things that might influence your policy or your intervention that you're working on. And then finally, I think there's something called leadership, and that's not necessarily for people in senior posts. So even coming in a junior role, you can show leadership to others and demonstrate those skills, and start to build on your ability to provide vision and direction for a group of individuals. I think will stand you in good stead.
Excellent, wonderful, wonderful answer. Leadership by experience, by example. Sorry, leadership by example. I was going to they use this frame. So yes, I definitely agree. It's so important. And what because we're getting to the end actually of our panel, and that's a great really answers, and I think everyone finds something helpful. What if I could close that by the conclusion that there is a space for everyone in air quality world. If you've got soft skills, if you've got technical skills, if you would like to finish job to the 100%, or if you would like to, if you like changing your jobs very quickly and wearing different hats, you can join consultancy, you can join the government agency, you can stay at university and really go into the deep research and into the cutting edge technologies. So the conclusion is work on your soft skills, communication skills, presentation skills, speak to people, network, and really find what you love and follow the path. And if in some point you decide this path is not exactly for you, don't be afraid to shut this door and just move to the side, to the, I don't know, sometimes step back and move forward. Thank you very much. We are recording this session, so this session will be shared. If you've got any other questions, please contact us. There will be some contact details shared. And thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the morning and afternoon. Have a nice afternoon.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you everyone. And you know, from the Breathing City Future Urban Ventilation Network, it's been great to have so many people on here. Thank you for all the speakers for everything they've put in. Thank you, Anna and Helen, for all the work in organising this. You know, these things don't just magically happen. There's quite a lot that goes on behind the scenes to plan a day and get speakers, and it's been a really interesting morning. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Yes.
Thanks all.
Bye.